Chief of Army Staff General Christopher Musa visits Borno State following resurgence of attacks on military bases, inspects Giwa Barracks Army Armory that exploded about 2 weeks ago. President Bola Tinubu approves the establishment of forest guards and the commencement of their employment to secure the over 1,000 forests in Nigeria. Hello and welcome to Politics Today, reaching you live from our global headquarters here in the nation's commercial nerve center, Lagos, where we're broadcasting. And of course, it's been quite a week. It's Thursday, 15th of May, where we track what's playing out in the polity. But let's begin with what's playing out in the economy. The inflation numbers are now officially out. They come out 15th of every month to relay to us, the MBS relays to us, what the inflation rates, the change in the prices of goods. Remember, it's the rebased CPI this time. So the inflation number now stands at 23.71. That's it has dropped from the 24.23 in the month of March. So for the month of April, it's 23.71. The food inflation stands at 21%. So we're seeing that marginal drop. So on the average, in the first 4 months of the year, the inflation has stayed around 23%, that oscillation. So we'll keep eyes on it. The president has said, based on the previous, before the rebasing, he had targeted 15% of inflation, so we're at 23. So if we do the math, it should actually be targeting single digit by the end of his first term. Now, away from all of that, let's tell you what's playing out in politics. The chairman of the Lagos State Independent Electoral Commission has revealed that the Labour Party in the state, Lagos State, has 3 factions. The National has 2. Lagos has 3. Now, he said it makes it difficult for the commission to relate with the party. The REC says, disclosed this during a stakeholders forum in Ikeja, Lagos, saying that the state electoral body awaits a directive from the INEC national headquarters on which faction of Labour Party to actually recognize in Lagos State in the forthcoming July the 12th local government elections.
Today, they invited us. Unfortunately, it's just a faction of Labour Party that invited us. On our records, we have 3 factions with 3 different names, sets of names. And because of that, you know, we don't have anything about the establishment of parties or who is the chairman, who is this or secretary. So we had to forward a letter to INEC for advice. And we are waiting that. So without that, we cannot participate in any primaries. And this we had intimated each faction. We had intimated each faction. So by the time I'm sure they'll resolve it, then they'll send the participation list of their members so they can take the forms. So we're ready, we're waiting. We're waiting. Other parties also had invited us on Saturday, PDP, SDP. So we'll see how we'll be able to touch each and every one of them.
So a simple message to Labour Party in Lagos State, just get your act together so that the commission will know exactly who they are relating with. Let's tell you, more defections are happening at the national level. Some of them are defected, but officially they presented their letters to the Speaker today. Honorable Oluwole Oke from Osun State officially moved from from PDP to the APC. He did it 2 weeks ago, but today he turned out, he gave his resignation letter that he has moved from the PDP to the APC. And 2 persons from Kano State, from the NNPP as well, Kabiru Rorom and Abdullahi Rogo, also moved to the APC from the NNPP. So the chairman of the APC was also on the floor of the House of Reps to witness that event. So literally a season of harvest for the All Progressives Congress. Good times as far as they are concerned at this moment. But beyond all of that, today we're going to be big on 2 things. Security, the resurgence of insecurity in the north, especially Borno State. We're going to also talk about the issue of governance and free speech. Those are the two parts of the conversation we had today on the program. But let's tell you that the president has now approved the establishment of forest guards and other commencement of employment to secure the over 1,000 forests in the country. The forest guards are to be trained and armed to perform their duties to flush out terrorists and criminal gangs hiding inside the forest for all kinds of criminal activities. And it will be a collaborative effort between the state and the federal government. The Office of the NSA and that of the Environment have now been directed to take charge and ensure the full implementation of the forest guards. I know it was part of the Renewed Hope agenda in his manifesto. But we also know that the Chief of Defense Staff headed out to Borno today, General Christopher Musa, he inspected the Giwa Barracks Armory that exploded about 2 weeks ago. He's in Borno on a working visit to that joint task force operation Hadinkai Theater, where he received briefs from the commanders and also gave them his own brief as to the effort of government to upscale issues around national security. Let's take a listen to him.
The naval guys we have seen are just part of the plans we're having ahead. The equipment are coming in, more platforms, air assets are coming in, more actions are being taken to ensure that we address these issues of the attacks here and there, and I can assure you that things will continue to be better. I want to assure the people in Maiduguri, Northeast and Nigeria in general, that the armed forces of Nigeria is determined, is willing, is committed, is capable of restoring peace and security in Nigeria, and we're working towards that. We want to remember that we've always mentioned that asymmetric warfare is a very, very difficult operation because it's unlike the conventional type where you can just go and cap a bomb a whole community and end it up. Here, because of the issues of human rights, not to impinge on the rights of civilians that are not part of them. So it is very difficult. It takes a lot of time, a lot of precision to be able to achieve that. But I can assure you that we're heading in the right direction and we'll continue to do more.
All right, as I said, two big issues today on the program. Insecurity in the north, especially in parts of Borno State, as well as the issue of governance and free speech. Those are the two things I'll be talking about with my guests. I'll introduce them, but let's bring you your political roundup stories. Okay.
A bill to amend the Electoral Act, making it mandatory for Nigerians of majority age to vote in all national and state elections, has scaled second reading in the House of Representatives. Leading the debate, Honorable Daniel Asama explains that the essence of democracy is participation, expressing the belief that mandatory voting can reduce the influence of vote buying. Also in the lower house, a bill for an act to amend the Labour Act to increase the maternity leave period for working women to 6 months has been stepped down after lawmakers, including women, debated against it. The Court of Appeal sitting in Abuja has reserved judgment in 3 filed appeals and a cross-appeal challenging the outcome of the September 21 governorship election held in Edo State, in which a 3-man panel of the court, presided over by Justice Mohammed Danjuma, added that the date will be communicated to the parties after their final arguments. The appeals include the one filed by the People's Democratic Party, PDP, and its candidate, Asue Igodalo, and a cross-appeal by the All Progressives Congress and its candidate in the election, Monday Okpebolo. The chairman of the Progressive Governors Forum and governor of Imo State, Hope Uzodinma, says despite the criticism of the opposition, President Tinubu has been vindicated by the international community because of his positive reforms in Nigeria. Speaking in Abuja after a meeting of the forum, Governor Uzodinma explains that international organizations like the World Bank and IMF are now beginning to commend the administration of President Bola Tinubu for taking bold decisions on embarking on a reform-driven government.
You know, at the beginning of this administration, when the president started with the reforms, the opposition was very loud in criticizing the policies of government. But today, Mr. President is being vindicated. Gradually, international organizations like World Bank, IMF, are now beginning to commend the administration of President Bola Tinubu.
Members of the All Progressives Congress APC in Abia State, led by former 2-term member of the House of Reps, Sam Onigbo, have officially launched the Renewed Hope Partners Initiative in a bid to ensure President Bola Tinubu's re-election in 2027. Speaking during the reception of some members of 5 different political parties and the inauguration exercise of the support group in Umuahia, Honorable Onigbo explains that achievements recorded by the President Tinubu administration through the Renewed Hope agenda show that experience counts in effective human and public resource management. And in Zamfara State, Northwest Region, the State House of Assembly has passed a vote of confidence on Governor Dauda Lawal in recognition of his remarkable achievements in infrastructure and the payment of outstanding entitlements to civil servants. The House Leader, Honorable Bello Mazawaje, while moving the motion, noted that for the first time in the history of Zamfara State, the state capital is experiencing rapid development, including the ongoing construction of an international airport.
Welcome back. One of the major, literally the most primary, if there's a word like that, let's call it what it is, the primary responsibility of government is to provide security and the welfare for citizens. That's captured in Section 14 of our Constitution. So whatever government does, no matter how great whatever they do, if these two things are not attended to, that government has failed. Now, some part of last year, we kind of experienced a bit of slowdown in attacks in some part of last year. But since this year, it's been one form of attack or the other. The carnage on the plateau, and that's on Benue, and now in Borno State. This time, literal assault on our sovereignty, attacking our forward bases somewhere around Lake Chad, inconsistency, which is why the CDS had to head out to reassure the troops, because it's a lot of work to secure Nigeria. We must commend them for their sacrifice. But we must also look at the things we may not be doing right. And that's why we brought in a consultant, security consultant and the CEO of Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited, Mr. Kabra Adamu. He joins us from our Abuja studio. Mr. Adamu, thank you so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure, Jeffrey. Good evening.
All right, Mr. Adamu, maybe we will, as you speak, we'll share with the people some of the things you shared with me as to the sequence of what you have noticed as far as the issue of Borno. Well, we're going to use Borno to piggyback on other issues. But there was a time it looked like Borno was kind of calm. But now it looks like every other day there is one form of attack. And the most daring part is the audacity of this anti-state element coming against our forward bases and killing us, our military, our army. Talk to us about some of the things you found out.
Yeah, extremely worrisome, Jeffrey. And for those of us who have been keeping tabs of the incidents that are occurring, we know that Borno was never really out of the woods. We know that, for instance, in the first quarter of 2025, Borno came third in terms of the frequency of fatalities and abduction that has been recorded across the 36 states of the Federation. We also know that the number of attacks, including the method of the attacks, has changed almost significantly. So in that period, first quarter of 2025 into April 2025, we recorded 98 IED incidents. When you compare that with the last quarter of 2024, what we recorded was just 38 of such incidents. So we know that for some odd reasons, the threat elements there, and these are really the two groups, the Jamaat al-Ahl Sunnah al-Dawati wal-Jihad and the Islamic State in West Africa province. We know that they have acquired some form of expertise to deploy these IEDs. The second element that also became obvious was the usage of complex attacks. And the complex attacks are a combination of different methods when they are attacking. And the one that was most disturbing within that period was their ability to deploy drones. Now, these drones are not, they just get commercial drones and then contract IEDs on them and then try to deploy them, targeting our security forces. The fourth point that also became extremely worrisome was their strategic targeting of locations that the Borno State governor seemed to be interested in returning internally displaced persons to. So we saw that happening in virtually almost all parts of North and then central parts of Borno State, and then, of course, some parts of Yobe State. So this was the pattern we've been seeing over the last few weeks in Borno. Of course, the incident that occurred in Giwa Barracks when one of the armories, caught fire at least based on the statement that the military has stated, also created some form of attention in that regard. Also, very significantly within that period, the theater commander was changed, and a new person was deployed to that theater commander. And since then, we've seen renewed vigor, as it were, from that person. But overall, the situation in Borno is extremely worrisome. Like I said, so far, in terms of fatalities, it has been the third state with the highest fatalities in the country at the moment.
And I know some part of northern Borno is, from the mappings that we're seeing that your organization has done, we're seeing those extreme places of extreme risk, and the heat map in that sense, the severity of attacks across parts of Borno State. But I want you to also speak to us about beyond Borno State. I remember the DHQ had made a release, and it was very disturbing for me personally, and I guess for a lot of people. The DHQ admitted to the fact that foreign herders, there's a terrorist organization, there's a militia herder, there are all kinds of definitions, there's bandits, there are kidnappers, depending on what part of the country you're looking at, they have different shapes or form. By the end of the day, they're assaulting, they are killing, and they are destroying lives. Talk to us about that admission or that submission by DHQ saying that foreign herders invade, let's say, part of Benue and even Plateau. Because what I process most of the time when I hear that, it's okay, this should be easy. If foreigners are coming into our country, killing our people and taking over land, that is an assault on our sovereignty. Or is it that I don't get the picture correctly?
Yeah, Jeffrey, you get the picture. I mean, we have no choice but to rely, as it were, for now, on the statement by the DHQ. And then we recently published a report when we undertook a study of development within the Sahel region. And clearly, there is a movement within the Sahel region into Nigeria. Benue has a border with some neighboring countries. And so it's very possible that there is a movement in that regard. But that brings to fore the challenge within our national security arrangement. Our borders are porous. And we are not doing enough to enhance border security. I hear a lot of political posturing. I hear, several conditionings, as it were, by different persons. But the reality is that as of today, our borders are extremely porous. The second point is our criminal justice system that is failing to arrest and punish these persons, whoever they are. It's amazing, Jeffrey, that the transhumance element within ECOWAS allows movement of livestock. Almost all the countries I've studied within the sub-region have mechanisms for recording and monitoring the movement of those transhumans, except Nigeria, the biggest country and the country with one of the highest challenges in insecurity. So my point is that enough of these excuses. We need to act to stop these things. I mean, there is enough knowledge regarding the reasons. If persons are coming in, there is a government department that has the responsibility to strengthen border security. We should wake up, and this is really a call to the National Assembly through their oversight function to ensure that these government departments that have responsibility, security has different components. Once you start bringing those components together, then you may see an improvement. But if every time all we speak about is the role of the military, which is perhaps the greatest undoing of our current existence, we have given the military too much responsibilities. All the other ministries, departments, and agencies that have responsibility for security, we're not giving them that same level of responsibility. Border management is not primarily the responsibility of the military. And so if the military is saying that there is an incursion, then we need to look closely at the agencies, the ministries that have responsibility for border management. If they are failing to the extent that we're seeing the types of attacks and the types of incursion, then we need to act speedily, as it were. Because, Jeffrey, the worry that I have for the situation is that this is an existential challenge. If we do not fix it, it is going to affect our future. And enough of excuses, frankly.
So how far-reaching? Because when we heard about the security summit, we understand a committee has been set up to that effect, led by Senator Kwame Bamidele, the Senate leader, for a security summit. So the natural conversation is, what is it that we don't know that we need a summit to aggregate that will make a difference? So I'm going to ask two questions in one. How far can this summit go? And the good news is to the effect, again, that the president has now ordered what do you call it now, the forest guards, establishment of forest guard. How far-reaching can this be? So two things. The issue of the forest guards on one hand to secure these thousands or over 1,000 forests we have in Nigeria, and then the essence of a security summit.
Almost every specialist expert that I have spoken with, including myself, are not supportive of another security summit. If the idea of the security summit is to bring people together to discuss the national security, it's not going to help us in any way. There is enough knowledge, there is enough information. Summits have been organized, conferences, convenings have been organized severally, including by the National Assembly, by different bodies. So if the methodology is going to change, perhaps to put together a group of individuals, if that is what the summit would do, to harness the several other conferences and summits that have been held, harness their recommendations, and then work out a framework for the implementation of that recommendation, then we're supportive of it. But if the idea is to hold another one, to come out with a set of recommendations similar to what has been done before, then honestly it's a waste of taxpayers' money. What we need right now is especially the National Assembly to use its oversight functions through the committees, and then of course to also through the budgetary process to look closely at what it has approved to ensure that those requirements. Let's remember, Jeffrey, that no sector at the moment has enjoyed as much provision within the 2025 budget as the security sector. So it's not an issue of funding, as long as those the funds are being released. It is rather an issue of making sure those funds are being used for the purposes. So instead of focusing attention on a summit, I think what we in Nigeria would love to see is more oversight and then more, as it were, checks to ensure that the funding provided for in the budget is released and it is used for the purposes that it is being released for. With regards to your second question on the forest guard, this is part of the Renewed Hope agenda. The president has always maintained that, and if you recall, I think last year, when he had a meeting with the governors, there was an agreement at that point in time that the governors should go ahead and do it, and maybe because they've not been able to do that, now we're hearing that he has taken that initiative. What it would look like in terms of the framing, what types of weapon they're going to bear, I think these are critical issues because the threat elements they're dealing with have military-grade weapons. So I'm begging the question, if you recruit young people, 2,000 to 5,000 of them, and then you don't give them military-grade weapons, they are going to be at the mercy of these threat elements. So we need to think critically around this. I'm not supportive of the further militarization of our country. I think there are enough weapons in circulation. So we need to be very careful around what kind of weapons, and then, of course, how we subsume this new arrangement into the overall national security sector or architecture that we have at the moment. So very, very critical questions, and I think the presidency would need to work closely with the National Assembly and with the governors to ensure that the structure and the framing of this new arrangement is one that will be beneficial and would not end up adding. I must state in very clear terms that the existence of ungoverned spaces, especially forested parts, is one of the major challenges that is contributing to our national security challenge at the moment. So anything to reduce the usage of those forests for the criminal activities that are being done at the moment, I'm very supportive of it, but we must do it in a manner that allows for progress, in a manner that reduces the tendency for the further militarization of our country.
So I'm wondering, because I'm looking at, I don't know, perhaps this is a reference for them to flush out terrorists and criminal gangs hiding inside the forest for criminal activities and all of that. If our military is having a hard time sometimes dealing with these guys, what level of weaponry do you think forest guards need to have? Or are they just going to be providing intel in that sense? Because these men, or these bad elements, as we choose to call them, they are upscaling in terms of their weaponry, using drones in that sense, to do some of the things they do today, killing our soldiers. So the forest guards, what kind of weaponry is required, and how effective will that be?
In the 101 of military tactics, there's what we call take, hold, and rebuild. So I don't expect these forest guards to be in the forefront of the warfare. Perhaps they can play a role in after the military has gone in, as them, as it were, taking over the forested parts. Then these guys can come in and play the role of forest wardens. When I was growing up as a kid, there were forest wardens, and they were quite effective. If you go to fell a tree in the forest, they will appear and they would ask you, why are you felling that tree? But because the threat element has changed, because the threat element now has military-grade weapon, I don't see what level of weaponry we're going to give those guys that they can stand the threat element. So perhaps it would be more in the hold component, and once the military takes over, scatter them, kill the ones that they need to kill, and block, and this is extremely important, Jeffrey, block their access to weaponry. We've not done very well in that regard for now. We must block their access to both the weapons, the hardware, and then the ammunition that they are using. And then these guys the forest guards may now hold the forested part. So again, the structure, the framing of the arrangement has to be one that is supportive of the current arrangement. It shouldn't be one that would lead to more killing of our security forces, like in the manner that we're seeing at the state level in places like Zamfara, Katsina, and other locations where the state level structures don't have the kind of weaponry that the bad guys have.
We cannot dismiss the fact that there are merchants of war or merchants of violence and crisis, and even crisis actors themselves that benefit from all of this. There could be both state and non-state actors. I would like to speak to that because I just had to look at the budget again from the proposal of the president. 4.91 trillion naira is what we have earmarked for the defense of our country for the year 2025. If you look at it and compare it to the budget size, that's almost like 10% of our entire budget. And it's always the biggest, as you've acknowledged. It keeps increasing every day, and we see some of the things. We thank the military that are doing the work they should do, but isn't it time for us to begin to do the tough things that we run away from doing? Because anytime it's being raised, it's being kicked down somehow. It's like a conversation we should never have. Probing our military spending. What is the crime in it?
So this is the legacy of the long years of military rule. One of the things I've been trying to do over a period now is to introduce stronger monitoring and evaluation within our security sector. And this mustn't be done by outsiders. Almost all the ministries, departments, and agencies have either units or departments for monitoring and evaluation. So this is one of the best ways that we could enhance efficiency within the system. Earlier when I did speak about the role of the National Assembly, we need to exact a little bit more pressure on the National Assembly so that the committees that have responsibility for oversight on the security sector will strengthen their oversight capacity. Of course, these things are not, you can't pick them on the ground. They need to train better. They need to enhance their capacity for oversight. They need to also reduce the handshake that they are having with the executive at the moment. Those who designed and framed our democracy did not design it in a manner that the handshake would be a very strong one. Yes, they should cooperate, they should collaborate, but not in areas of where it may lead to misjudgment, as it were, on the spending of resources. Again, I want to emphasize that we're dealing with an existential challenge, and as a country, we need to stop the politics and enhance public security.
Great point you've raised. Let's get away from the north and talk about some of the things that are happening down south. We've seen issues of kidnapping and issues of robbery in that sense. But kidnapping, for instance, there's a particular one I've been following for. This is on Good Friday, about 20 people or so were kidnapped along the Oron-Calabar waterway. So if you're familiar with that area between Cross River and Akwa Ibom State, you realize that the road is very bad. The Calabar road is very bad. The governments have complained. I lived in Cross River for over 15, 20 years ago, and I knew that road was bad, and it's a surprise. It's been a long time I traveled in that direction till today. That's still a conversation, 15 plus years after. So people choose to use the waterway. And then there are parts you use on that waterway that could expose you to trouble, and eventually certain persons were kidnapped. It's almost a month now they've been kidnapped in that sense. And been trying to get them out, and they're asking for all kinds of ransom. I want you to speak to the general sense of safety and well-being, because when you talk to people in government, they say, oh, things are improving. What really should we use to mark improved security? Is it number of attacks? Is it number of fatalities? Is it a sense of safety? We know it's not possible to just have crime cut out eventually. How should we measure success in management of security? Because the president is going to be doing his midterm on May the 29th, 2025, and they are going to bring their scorecard, and perhaps they're going to say they are doing well.
Well, let's not preempt that, but what we can do is to use the knowledge that we have at our availability. As you know, I run a company, and part of what we do is to keep a record of security occurrences. Between the month of March and April, we saw a 49% increase in abduction in the country, Jeffrey. I repeat, 49% increase in abduction in just 1 month, month to month. Now, in terms of the geographical dispersal and distribution of this abduction, it still remains in the northern part of the country. But we're seeing an increase, just like you rightly indicated, in the southern part of the country, especially in places like the southwest and then some parts of the south-south. With regards to this particular incident in Oron, Calabar, I've been on that waterway, not once, not twice. I have a very good idea of the geography and how difficult it would be. This is with all sense of responsibility. We are praying, and whatever support we can render to the families and the security forces to bring these guys out, we will do it. But it's a dense location. It's a very difficult location to police. And so those type of occurrences, unfortunately, once they occur, it even makes it more difficult to rescue and bring out. But having said that, every inch of our territory, we've got capabilities for surveillance. And where the capabilities are weak, those are areas we need to enhance support. Technology can help us in that regard to enhance surveillance capabilities, to look at, in a forensic manner, where the incident occurred, the movement from that location, and then, of course, the other component of surveillance. Because I'm in a public space, I'll be very careful what I say, but let's just leave it at that. Through surveillance capabilities, we can exert pressure on those that are holding them. I'm very happy that the National Assembly, I think it was the House of Rep, did discuss it, and I think there was a motion that was moved to kind of put pressure on the executive arm of government to get these 20 persons out. We also need to work closely with the local community to ensure that we harness the intelligence information that is available regarding the possible perpetrator of that particular act, and then, of course, put pressure on that particular. So there's a lot we can do, really, to assist and bring these 20 persons out of the country.
All right, Mr. Kabura, we're going to bring you back at proper midterm. We will look at all the elements of, because it's our country, we have only one country, and the president has our mandate to lead us and manage our commonwealth. How well he's doing that with our money is going to be left to the lived-in experience of Nigerians. We will assess him, because right now we have to force a conversation around governance. If not, every day we're talking politics, and he's barely 2 years in office. Elections are far away. There are defections here and there. It's populating the headlines. So we decided, okay, let's face governance and ask for accountability for the ones, the time spent so far. Kabir Adamo, the CEO of Beacon Security and Intelligence Consulting, thank you so much for coming on the program. We appreciate you.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, when we come back after the break, we will talk about the issue of electoral reforms, governance, and whether or not the APC government is hostile to dissenting voices. We'll find out after the break. Join us again. Welcome back. My guest is Mr. Samson Itodo. He's Executive Director of Yaga Africa. He joins us from our Abuja studio. Mr. Itodo, thank you for coming on the program.
Thanks, Geoffrey. Always a delight to be here.
I'm happy you're not just an election and governance man, you're also a lawyer. So let me allow you to do some heavy lifting. So I was just concerned when I saw that the DSS had sued Professor Patutomi. So a background to that is the effect that Professor Patutomi has said he's going to set up a shadow government to look at how government is delivering on its mandate, more like the agents of government, policy for policy, and preference solution. Well, the APC responded through their spokesperson, Mr. Felix Moka, and a 3-pager calling him an intellectual drag. There's a name it's called. I can't remember the full name now. In that sense, so Well, I did interview Professor Pat last week, Friday, and said, Prof, what exactly do you mean? How is it going to work? We're running presidential, not parliamentary system. And I explained that, look, some set of individuals having expertise in different areas will be checking government policy for policy, looking at options and criticizing, and, you know, just like the parliament will do. Well, I had Mr. Felix Moka in the studio, and I told him, now that you've understood the explainer of Mr. Professor Tommy, would you apologize? He said, no, the way Prof went about it, but now you understand. So to now see the DSS pick up this, what do you make of it?
Well, I think that the response of the state to Professor Utomi's proposed action it really raises a couple of concerns, and it's concerns with respect to what is the place of dissent in a democracy. What is a place of accountability in a democracy? Because all the erudite professor just said is establishing or setting up a shadow government to hold the government to account. It doesn't in any way mean that he's usurping the powers of the president or he's establishing a parallel government. For those who know how shadow governments actually work, it's just an instrument of accountability. It's just a symbolic, accountability action. And citizens have a right, to ask questions and hold government to account depending on the vehicle that they use. But I see no reason why they're instituting, a litigation, an action against Professor Utomi. I would strongly advise against it. I think he has explained what he meant, by that. It's not in any way seeking to unconstitutionally remove or usurp the powers of the president. President Tinubu still remains the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. He's a creation of the Constitution. And so he have the legislature that exists to limit the exercises of executive powers. But initiatives as the ones proposed by Professor Utomi is just nothing but holding government to account. Critiquing government and government policies is how democracy thrives. So I think that we should encourage efforts where citizens are able, to interrogate government policies and profile alternatives and solutions. That's how our nation actually grows. The country cannot grow with one set of individuals determining the structure, the form, the content of how government should run. No, that's not how democracy works. Democracy works on diversity and competition of ideas.
We're going to come to some of the electoral reforms that we're supposed to talk about, but talk to us about how this is playing out in terms of optics, because it's very worrying. The PDP, for instance, is not put together with the greatest sense of respect to them. In fact, there are three national secretaries in that sense, 2 and 3. Labour Party, I read it today, Labour Party in Lagos is having 3 people they want to correspond with INEC, and they have 2 at the national level. And then you have individuals within these parties that are trying to be some voices of opposition. They're either man-marked by individuals within the ruling party, either online or offline, in that sense, word for word, and sometimes it gets dirty. So now this looks like the only form that looks a bit organized, and this is coming with a litigation. Isn't this even giving credence to what Prof is even talking about, that this is hostility to dissenting voice?
No, quite frankly, I don't think it's good optics for the government. The most important thing is Professor Utomi has explained what he meant by, a shadow government. And once he's done that, he's exonerated himself, from any allegation of an attempt to usurp the powers of the president or remove the president unconstitutionally. He has explained it, and this every Nigerian, will understand the plain language which Professor Utomi actually spoke. So I really think that this is not good optics. It actually suggests that, there's a rejection and a strong opposition, to dissent and calls for accountability. And I hope that, the DSS can reconsider its decision. If it needed any form of clarification, it would have written, to Pat Utomi to explain what he meant. But the erudite prof has explained, like you referenced in your interview, what he meant by a shadow government. It doesn't mean he's establishing, another government within an existing constitutional order, because the constitutional order that we recognize today is President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That is established and it's not in doubt in any way. A shadow government is simply, it's a form of social engagement and social control, but also social accountability. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, in my considered opinion.
All right, Mr. Toto, let's go to electoral matters now, because for me, if it was just politicians giving themselves what Nigerians call basbos in that direction, I would have been okay. It's normal things they do, but having an institution of state getting into these murky waters is very disturbing, and I wish that the DSS can explain themselves even further, because it's very concerning. But let's talk about, the INEC had said they have about 140 so reviews from what they've seen in the 2023 presidential election or general election, and ahead of 2027, they submitted some things that we don't know the content, but you've also done some background work. So let's take a look at some of the things we really need, because recruitment process is still a challenge for Nigerians, and the layers are many. So walk us through some of the things we should be insisting on before 2027 in terms of reforms.
Well, thanks, Geoffrey. I think Nigerians need to know that today makes it exactly 646 days to the 2027 elections. And it's about 1 year and 8 months. And what that means is we do not have time. And there's a great need for the National Assembly to conclude on the ongoing reforms. And ahead of the 2027 elections, there are 6 types of elections that were expected. We expect that there will be by-elections. There's the Anambra election. There's the Ekiti, the Osun governorship election ahead of the 2027 elections. There's the FCT area council elections due in February next year. So we have all these elections, but you also see that the trust level in the electoral process is very low based on what Afrobarometer, YIGA Africa, including NY polls have told us. But INEC has proposed some amendments to the Electoral Act and also the Constitution. Now you think about what are those reforms that are needed that we need to prioritize. For me, there are about 5, what you might call landmark proposed amendments. The first amendment that is required to inspire trust and confidence in Nigerians is mandatory electronic transmission of results. The reason why you need mandatory transmission of election results is to deepen the integrity of the electoral process. Now, that's one. The second point relates to the PVCs, whether we need the PVCs to vote. As of today, Geoffrey, you and I know that the BVAS has the voters register, and once a voter shows up at the polling units, if they tender any form of identification, as long as your name is on the voters register, you should be allowed to cast your vote. And this saying that no PVC, no vote, I think is obsolete. We need to move beyond that in view of the role of the BVAS. Because we've seen Nigerians who've been disenfranchised, not because they refused to turn up to collect their permanent voter's card, but as a result of INEC's logistical challenges. So why do you discriminate and disenfranchise those people? And now INEC is proposing that electronically downloadable PVCs should be allowed, to cast for voters to tender in the course of voter verification. The third point is about the appointment process. One thing is really interesting. This is actually the first INEC that seemed to be pushing for the removal of the powers of the president to appoint commissioners. Although INEC is proposing that the power be removed from the president and vested in INEC with respect to the appointment of resident electoral commissioners. But like Justice Uwais recommended, that power to appoint both the INEC chairman and the national commissioners and the resident electoral commissioners should be removed from the president and vested, in another institution that enjoys multi-stakeholder participation. The other amendment relates to early voting. Geoffrey, I don't know when last you voted in an election, But here is a country, in our country today, journalists are unable to cast their vote, security officials are unable to cast their vote, INEC officials, accredited observers are unable to cast their vote because they are involved in election services. That is not proper in a country that seeks to defend the rights of voters. Therefore, early voting is one form, one strategy of protecting the rights of this category of people to cast their vote. And that is on the table in this current reform process, and it should be encouraged.
Let's talk about something I saw that played out at the National Assembly, where I think there's a bill to that effect as to making it mandatory for persons to vote. Shouldn't voting be voluntary? We know it's our civic duty, but this bill intends to make it compulsory because we have a declining number in terms of voter turnout, given the number of people that register to collect their PVC, voter apathy in that sense. Should we make voting mandatory? Would that be legal?
I think it's important to know that Nigeria will not be the first country that practices compulsory voting. Australia practices compulsory voting. But here is my take, Geoffrey. I understand the rationale behind that proposed bill, which is to encourage, turnout at elections, because Nigeria has the lowest turnout in elections in the whole of Africa, even though we have the highest number of registered voters in our voters register, but we have the lowest turnout. 25% in the last election is abysmally poor. I understand the rationale, but I think compelling and also imposing 6 months jail term is draconian in every respect, and it undermines the freedom to participate in the electoral process. I think that bill totally amounts to legislative overkill. I don't think that it will pass. We cannot compel participation, because not participating is also another form of political participation, and we need to recognize that. And if the National Assembly, in its wisdom, is seeking ways, to enforce and ensure turnout in an election, then we need to ensure that votes count. Because if people trust that their votes will count at elections, they will show up. Secondly, people who are elected in elections should deliver good governance, so that when people reconcile the state of their livelihood and their participation in elections, they will turn up to cast their vote subsequently. But when people stand in long queues, they vote for people into office, and when people get into office, they don't solve problems that their voters ask them to solve. They only are interested in primitive accumulation of wealth. When that happens, people feel that voting is a waste of their time because leaders don't solve the problems that they vote them into power to solve. Or when they are given power in trust for the people, they abuse that power and use that same power to oppress the people. When that happens, people will have no reason why they should show up to cast their vote. So I think these are issues that we should address using the reform process rather than compelling voters to cast their vote. I understand the rationale. It's a good rationale. It's good intention, but this approach is not what will increase turnout at elections.
It was, when I saw it, it was very concerning as well to say somebody will have to go to jail for not voting. It's just funny. But the lawmakers will have to do what the lawmakers will have to do. Ours is just to put them on the spot to know exactly whether this is well thought through. There's another part of election that I would like to speak to as we close, and that has to do with local government elections. I have noticed that when it comes to local government elections, the maximum we see is perhaps INEC register. I do not think, correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe not across the country, that they use beavers for local government elections, do they?
Well, thank you, Geoffrey, for actually bringing that issue. Because there's actually a topical issue that's happening in Lagos, and maybe I should just speak to that. If you look at what's happening in Lagos, the State Electoral Commission, has issued, notice and has fixed, a date in July for elections. Now, the law is very clear. Provisions of the Electoral Act are very clear, Chapter 5 to be specific, that local government elections, shall hold not earlier than 150 days and not later than 30 days, to the expiration of the term of the current office holders. The date fixed by the Lagos State Electoral Commission is 13 days outside the official time frame provided in the provisions of the Electoral Act. Therefore, if the State Electoral Commission proceeds with the current date, it will be running foul of the Electoral Act, and the same fate that befell the Rivers State local government election might befall Lagos State. So I think it's important that stakeholders are quite aware. But you think about, local government elections, quite frankly, yes, they don't use BVAS for obvious reasons, because the BVAS is used for national elections. And these are opportunities that are provided in this reform process to see how can we sanitize that entire process of voter accreditation to make local governments more transparent and credible.
Okay. Mr. Todo, there's a lot when it comes to this reform. So we'll be looking at National Assembly and persons like you to bring us up to speed as to how to better strengthen our electoral system. Samson Itodo is the Executive Director of Yaga Africa, joining us from Abuja studios. Thank you, sir, for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it on the program. Thanks for your time and company. I'm Jeffrey Uzonga. Bye-bye.